Let me tell you something that might hurt a little. You don't have a bad memory. You've just been learning vocabulary the wrong way your entire life. Think about it. How many English words have you studied already? Hundreds? Maybe? Thousands? Now answer this honestly. How many of them can you actually use in a real conversation? Exactly. Most learners spend years memorizing long vocabulary lists. They write words again and again. They highlight them. They even test themselves. And yet, a few days later, those same words disappear. It feels like pouring water into a bucket full of holes. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You don't forget because you're lazy. You forget because your brain was never designed to remember isolated words. Your brain doesn't store information like a dictionary. It stores experiences, connections, emotions, and meaning. So when you try to memorize a word like abandon equals leave, your brain treats it like useless data. There's no story, no emotion, no context, so it deletes it fast. But here's where things get interesting. Have you ever noticed that you can remember entire song lyrics without even trying? Or movie lines? Or conversations from years ago? That's because those words were never studied. They were experienced. And that changes everything. So the real question is not, how can I memorize more words? The real question is, how can I make words impossible to forget? Because there are people out there who don't struggle like this. They don't memorize vocabulary lists. They don't spend hours reviewing flashcards. Yet somehow, they remember words effortlessly. And more importantly, they actually use them fluently, naturally, confidently. What's their secret? It's not talent. It's not intelligence. It's method. In this series, you're going to completely change the way you learn vocabulary. You'll understand why your current method is failing you. And more importantly, you'll learn a system that works with your brain, not against it. By the end of this journey, you won't just know more words. You'll finally be able to use them. And once that happens, there's no going back. Chapter 2. How memory really works. Your brain is not a storage machine. It is a survival machine. That means it does not try to remember everything. It tries to remember what matters. And what matters is not decided by you. It is decided by how your brain processes information. Every time you see a new English word, three things happen. First, encoding. This is when your brain receives the information. You read the word, hear it, or see it in a sentence. But here's the problem. Most learners stop here. They think exposure equals learning. It doesn't. Just seeing a word once or even 10 times does not mean your brain will keep it. Because after encoding comes the second stage. Your brain asks a simple question. Is this worth keeping? If the answer is no, the word is discarded. Not because you are bad at learning, but because your brain is efficient. It removes what feels useless. Now comes the third stage. Retrieval. This is the most important part. If you cannot pull a word out of your memory when you need it, then for practical purposes, you don't know it. And here's the key insight. Memory is not strengthened by putting information in. It is strengthened by pulling information out. This is why rereading your notes feels easy, but doesn't work. You recognize the word, so it feels familiar. But recognition is not the same as recall. Real learning happens when your brain struggles. When you try to remember a word and almost fail that moment is where memory grows stronger. This is called active recall. It is uncomfortable, but it works. Now, combine that with timing. If you review a word right before you forget it, your brain receives a signal. This matters. Keep it. This is known as spaced repetition, not repeating randomly, repeating strategically, at increasing intervals. Day 1, Day 3, Day 7, Day 14. Each time, the memory becomes stronger and more stable. So instead of forcing your brain to memorize everything at once, you are training it gradually, naturally, efficiently. Most people fail not because they don't study enough, but because they ignore how memory actually works. They overload the encoding stage. They neglect storage. and they never train retrieval. Once you understand this system, everything changes. You stop blaming your memory, and you start working with it. Chapter 3. Learn words in context. Not isolation. A single word, by itself, is almost meaningless to your brain. When you see the word charge, what does it mean? It could mean to pay money. It could mean to attack. It could mean to fill a battery. Without context, the word is unstable. Your brain does not know where to place it. And when something has no clear place, it does not stay. This is why memorizing word lists is so fragile. You are trying to remember floating pieces of information with no structure. But language is not built from isolated words. It is built from patterns, from relationships, from usage. When you learn a word inside a sentence, everything changes. Take this example. I need to charge my phone. Now your brain sees more than just a word. It sees a situation, a phone, a need, an action. This creates a mental scene, and that scene becomes a hook, a place where the word can attach itself. The stronger the scene, the stronger the memory. That's why simple translation is not enough. If you learn charge égale, you only create a weak connection. But if you learn, I forgot to charge my phone last night, now you have meaning, context, and experience. Your brain remembers experiences far better than definitions. Another powerful method is building micro-stories. Instead of learning one word, create a short, vivid situation. For example, if you learn the word exhausted, don't just memorize it. Imagine this. I worked for 12 hours without a break. I was completely exhausted. Now, the word is tied to effort, time, and feeling. It becomes real. You can also personalize it. After my last exam, I was exhausted. The more personal the context, the deeper the memory, because now it connects to your life, and your brain prioritizes information related to you. There is one simple rule you should follow. If there is no sentence, there is no learning. Even better, if there is no situation, there is no memory. So instead of asking, what does this word mean? Start asking, when do people actually use this? How would I say this in my life? This shift is small, but it completely transforms how your brain processes vocabulary. Words stop being abstract. They become usable, and once a word becomes usable, it becomes unforgettable. Chapter 4. The Power of Repetition. Repeating something over and over does not guarantee you will remember it. In fact, repeating the wrong way can create an illusion of learning. You read the same list again. You recognize the words. They feel familiar, and your brain tells you, I know this. But the moment you try to use the word, it disappears. That is not memory. That is familiarity, and familiarity is fragile. The problem is not repetition itself. The problem is how you repeat. Most learners use mass repetition. They study the same words many times in a short period. For example, reviewing a list 10 times in one day. This feels productive, but it is one of the least effective methods because your brain has not had time to forget. And if there is no forgetting, there is no strengthening. Real memory is built through effortful recall after forgetting begins. This is where smart repetition comes in. Instead of repeating immediately, you repeat at the right moment, right before the memory fades completely. This timing creates a powerful signal. This information is important. A simple structure can change everything. Review a new word after 1 day, then 3 days later, then 1 week, then 2 weeks. Each time, the gap increases. And each time, your brain works harder to retrieve the word. That effort is what strengthens the memory, not the repetition itself. You can think of it like training a muscle. If the weight is too light, nothing changes. If you review too soon, your brain does not need to work. But if the timing is right, the struggle creates growth. Another important factor is variation. If you always review words in the same format, your brain becomes passive. It starts to rely on patterns instead of memory. So change the way you review. Sometimes, look at the word and recall the meaning. Other times, look at the meaning and recall the word, or use the word in a sentence without looking, or try to explain it in your own words. Each variation forces your brain to rebuild the connection. This makes the memory more flexible and more durable. Tools can help, but they are not the solution. Flashcards, apps, and systems only work if you use them correctly. If you simply flip cards without thinking, you are not training memory. You are just passing time. The goal is not to see the word again. The goal is to struggle, retrieve, and succeed. That is how repetition becomes powerful. And once repetition is used correctly, forgetting stops being a problem. It becomes part of the process. Chapter 5. Use it or lose it. There is a simple rule your brain follows. If you don't use it, you don't need it. And if you don't need it, your brain will remove it. This is not a flaw. It is efficiency. Your brain is constantly deciding what deserves space and what does not. So when you learn a new word and never use it again, your brain receives a clear message. This is not important. And it deletes it. Not immediately, but inevitably. This is why so many learners feel stuck. They study vocabulary every day. They recognize many words. But when it's time to speak, nothing comes out. Because recognition is passive, usage is active. And only active use tells your brain to keep something. Think about your native language. You don't remember words because you studied them. You remember them because you use them constantly. The same principle applies here. If a word does not enter your daily life, it will not stay in your memory. So, the question becomes, how do you turn a word into something you actually use? You don't need complicated exercises. You need consistent, simple actions. Start with speaking, even if your sentences are basic, even if you make mistakes. Say the word out loud. Your brain connects sound, movement, and meaning together. That creates a stronger memory. Next, writing. Take a new word and write 3 sentences with it. Not copied sentences, your sentences. This forces your brain to think, choose, and construct. That effort builds ownership. Another powerful method is internal use. Talk to yourself in English. Describe what you are doing. I'm feeling tired today. I need to finish this task. These small moments create repetition without effort, and they make vocabulary part of your thinking process. Teaching is even stronger. If you can explain a word to someone else, you truly understand it. Because you are not just recalling it, you are reorganizing it. There is also a shift you must make. Stop asking, "Do I know this word?" Start asking, "Can I use this word?" Knowing is passive. Using is real. A word becomes yours only when it appears naturally in your speech or writing. Until then, it is temporary. So every time you learn something new, give it a purpose. Find a way to use it within 24 hours. Even once is enough to begin, because the moment you use a word, it stops being information and starts becoming part of you. Chapter 6. Emotional memory and visualization. Your brain does not treat all memories equally. Some disappear within hours. Others stay for years. The difference is not repetition. It is intensity. When a word is connected to emotion or vivid imagery, your brain marks it as important. Not logically important, emotionally important. And emotional memories are stored deeper and recalled faster. This is why you can remember embarrassing moments from years ago, but forget vocabulary from yesterday. Emotion creates priority. So if you want to remember words, you need to stop learning them in a neutral way. You need to make them feel something. One simple method is visualization. Instead of reading a word, create a clear mental image. For example, the word gigantic. Don't translate it. See it. Imagine a gigantic elephant walking into your room, breaking everything around you. The more exaggerated the image, the better. Your brain remembers unusual things. Normal information fades. Strange, dramatic, or funny images stay. Another technique is adding emotion. Take the word furious. Don't just understand it. Feel it. Imagine a moment when someone was extremely angry. Hear their voice. See their face. Now, attach the word to that feeling. You are no longer memorizing. You are reliving, and your brain is designed to remember experiences, not definitions. You can also combine both techniques into short, vivid scenes. For example, the word slippery. Instead of repeating it, imagine yourself walking on a slippery floor, falling hard, and feeling embarrassed while people laugh. Now the word has motion, sensation, and emotion. It becomes alive. Another powerful approach is making things personal. Generic examples are easy to forget. But when something connects to your life, it becomes meaningful. Instead of, he was exhausted, think, I was exhausted after working all night. Now the word is tied to your experience, and your brain prioritizes personal relevance. There is also a counterintuitive trick. Make your associations ridiculous. The more unrealistic, the better, because your brain is constantly filtering out normal information. It pays attention to what stands out. So, if a word becomes part of a bizarre story, it has a much higher chance of staying. At first, this may feel unnatural, but that is exactly why it works. Memory is not about seriousness. It is about impact. When words become images, feelings, and experiences, they stop being abstract. They become real. And once something feels real, your brain stops trying to forget it. Chapter 7. Build your personal vocabulary system. There is no perfect method that works for everyone. What works for one learner may fail completely for another. Because memory is not just about techniques. It is about consistency. And consistency only happens when the system fits your life. Most people fail not because they lack motivation, but because they try to follow systems that are too rigid, too complex, or too unrealistic. They start strong, then slowly stop. So instead of searching for the best method, you need to build a system you can actually maintain. Simply, flexibly, personal. Start with selection. Not all words are equally important. If you try to learn everything, you will remember nothing. So choose vocabulary based on your needs. If your goal is conversation, focus on high-frequency, everyday words. If your goal is work, focus on terms related to your field. Relevance increases retention because your brain sees immediate value. Next is structure. Your daily system does not need to be long. It needs to be repeatable. For example, learn a small number of new words each day. Review previous words using spaced repetition. Use at least some of them in speaking or writing. This can take as little as 20 to 30 minutes. What matters is not intensity. It is continuity. Another key element is tracking. Not to create pressure, but to create awareness. When you track what you learn and review, you see progress. And progress creates motivation. Even a simple checklist is enough. What you want to avoid is overload. Too many words, too many tools, too many techniques. This leads to mental fatigue. And when learning feels heavy, you stop. A good system should feel manageable, almost effortless to start. You should also allow flexibility. Some days you will have more time, some days less. Your system should adapt, not break, because the goal is not perfection. It is persistence. There is also an important shift to make. Stop focusing on how many words you learn. Start focusing on how many words you retain and use. Quantity feels productive, but retention is what actually matters. A smaller, well-used vocabulary is far more powerful than a large, unused one. Over time, your system will evolve. You will discover what works best for you. Keep what works. Remove what doesn't. Refine continuously. Because the best system is not the most advanced one. It is the one you never stop using. Chapter 8. From memorizing to thinking in English. At some point, memorizing words is no longer enough. You can know thousands of words and still struggle to speak. Because knowing words is not the same as thinking in a language. Right now, your process probably looks like this. You hear something in English. You translate it into your native language. You think of a response. Then you translate it back into English. This takes time. And more importantly, it breaks flow. Fluency is not about speed of translation. It is about eliminating translation altogether. When you truly know a word, you don't convert it. You recognize it instantly, like how you understand your native language without effort. So, how do you reach that point? You stop treating English as a subject and start treating it as a tool for thought. One simple way to begin is internal dialogue. Throughout your day, describe what you are doing in English. I'm walking to work. I need to buy something later. The weather feels nice today. These are small sentences, but they create a direct connection between your thoughts and English. No translation, just expression. At first, it will feel slow. You may not know the exact words. That's okay. Use what you know. Simplify your thoughts. Fluency grows from simplicity, not complexity. Another powerful method is describing your environment. Look around and name things. Create sentences about what you see. The table is messy. There are too many books here. This trains your brain to react in English automatically. You can also practice retelling. After watching a video or reading something, explain it in your own words. Not perfectly, just clearly. This forces your brain to organize ideas directly in English, without relying on your native language. There is also an important mindset shift. Stop aiming for perfect sentences. Aim for continuous thinking. Mistakes do not block fluency. Hesitation does. The more you allow yourself to think freely, the faster your brain adapts. Over time, something subtle happens. You stop translating. You start recognizing. Then you start predicting. Words come faster. Sentences feel natural. And eventually, you don't think about English anymore. You think in it. That is the moment everything changes. Because now, vocabulary is no longer something you memorize. It is something you use automatically. And once your brain reaches that state, language stops being something you study. It becomes something you live.